Hey everyone, Tactics here, and in this video I wanted to quickly talk about the 4 new XAL'ATATH affixes in Season 1 of The War Within, as I've been getting a lot of questions about them recently, especially with the reset going into Week 2 of Mythic Plus being available, and there being a new one that players weren't ready for. We'll be discussing exactly what they do in this video, both positive and negative, as well as giving you some tips for how your group can optimize how you handle them. Now, if you have any other things that you guys are looking for me to talk about or cover in these videos, be sure to let me know down in the comments below. Otherwise, let's get right into it here, starting with the affix from Week 1, Ascendant. This one is definitely pretty straightforward, and it's reminiscent of the orb mechanic from Raszageth, for anyone that did that boss. Basically, XAL'ATATH just kind of shows up somewhere, and then around her general vicinity, she spawns several waves of orbs for 10 total. When these orbs are spawned, they start a 7-ish second cast, which if successful will increase the haste and speed of all mobs you're in combat with. To prevent this, players are able to use either an interrupt or a CC, like stuns or fears, to destroy these orbs, granting them and their entire party a stacking 2% haste and speed buff for themselves, up to a maximum here of 20% since there are 10 orbs. This basically means that if you can spec into additional forms of AoE CCs or even single target CCs for this week, it is super beneficial, as it can help your group get to that 10 stack cap to both empower yourselves and prevent the mobs from being empowered. It is important to note though, as I mentioned earlier, these orbs do spawn around XAL'ATATH's positioning, so wherever she appears, you need to be ready to either move back towards that spot if you've been moving away, or stay around that spot if it's nearby. These spawns also only happen while in combat, though it can queue up while you're finishing combat, and everything can be dead when these orbs start to actually appear, so just be aware of that. Moving on to the affix that players learned about this week, we've got Oblivion. Again, XAL'ATATH kind of appears. This time she spawns several crystals around the pack relatively far away, and these slowly drift to one specific mob in that pack, and it'll grant them a damage reduction if it reaches them. Players are able to steal these crystals though by running in front of them, granting the entire group a stacking mastery and leech buff, which again caps at 10 stacks here since 10 crystals are spawned. When these spawns happen, I do recommend fanning out as a group with everyone here in your party participating to prevent these crystals from reaching the mobs. Players in melee in particular are kind of the last line of defense, so make sure between the tank and any melee DPS or healer players you have, you are evenly spread out around the pack so no one has to do like a 180 here and you can safely get all crystals. As a note, the tooltip on live servers for this affix currently says mobs gain a damage increase, though I assume this is just a tooltip error as the affix was changed late in the beta cycle. Then we get to the new ones, which we haven't seen yet on live servers, where one of these two are going to be present next week when keys open up. Let's start with the Voidbound affix, which spawns an emissary ad which doesn't have any aggro table and just follows around your tank. While alive, every 3 seconds, this mob applies a stacking DR to everything that you are in combat with, so it's important to swap and kill this as soon as possible. Once you defeat it, all of the DR stack that's put out onto the pack disappear, and instead your group gains a 20% increased cooldown rate and 10% healing received for 20 seconds, and as a known fan of everything CDR related, this buff feels really nice. For some tech to help you defeat these mobs, the biggest thing to note is that its entire health bar is actually an absorb, meaning any talents to deal additional damage to shields can be nice to deal a big burst of damage to help bring these guys down. On top of that, anything that helps you deal extra execute damage also works here since the mob is technically at 1 HP. That brings us to the final affix, which again could come as early as next week, and that's the Devour affix. Like all of the other ones we've talked about so far, this starts when XAL'ATATH appears in your key, but instead of summoning something for you to deal with, she instead debuffs all 5 party members with Void Rift, which is a dot that deals 1% max health damage per second for 15 seconds and heals all mobs you're in combat with for 10% health on expiration. You can remove these debuffs early and prevent that healing in a couple different ways, with the easiest of being in the form of a Dispel. These debuffs count as every single Dispel type in the game, so disease, curse, poison, magic, all of those work. In addition, things like dwarf racials work, cauterizing flame, and other AoE debuff removals also work here with mass dispel and poison cleansing totem. So speccing into those abilities this week is super useful. The other way to remove this debuff is through healing, with the debuff size being just north of 50% max health on each player. Now, I want to be clear here, this is not a healing absorb. If you take damage with this debuff and get healed, your health will go up and the debuff value will go down, so you aren't going to get into any of these really bad wombo combos in keys where you take AoE damage and then you can't be healed. This also gives some additional counterplay to certain classes, allowing you to use things like large self-healing abilities like Renewal or Impending Victory to eat away at this debuff, or even AoE healing abilities like Ancestral Guidance and Vampiric Embrace to help reduce the size of your entire party's debuffs. In general, this affix kind of seems like Afflicted, and I'm sure a lot of people will make that comparison, but it is a bit more forgiving with additional counterplay, at least in my opinion. There is also a benefit, of course, for removing these debuffs, just like the other XAL'ATATH affixes, where in this case you get a stacking crit and max health buff whenever one is removed, stacking up to 5 here since only 5 debuffs go out. And that is pretty much it for all of these new XAL'ATATH affixes. And when you hit the +12s here, remember, these get all removed, and in exchange you get additional dungeon scaling. So if you're pushing keys, every single week is a push week. Hopefully this video helped you out though, and if it did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like it, including my +10 Keystone Hero route walkthroughs, which I've been releasing, as well as 0.1% title route walkthroughs coming later on in the season. Of course, I need to give a massive shout out to my Patreons for their continued support. Otherwise, thanks to everyone so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.